Okay, fiscal focus time brought to you by InfoChoice, the choice of information on Australian consumer finance. So for this week's chat, we wanted to get some expert reactions to the RBA's decision to hike rates this month. So first up, straight out of the gate, we've got Judo Bank's Chief Economic Advisor, Warren Hogan. G'day, Warren. Good to have you back on the Savings Tip Jar.
G'day. Thanks for having me on the show.
Nice to see you again, Warren. So first cab off the rank, what were you paying attention to more, the Melbourne Cup jump or the RBA rate increase? And if the latter, what did you make of it?
I was like watching the RBA, unfortunately, as an economist. In the old days, the RBA used to have their meeting on the Tuesday and make their announcement on a Wednesday morning. And they changed it, I don't know, 15 years ago. It ruined Melbourne Cup for money markets and economists. So anyway, look, they pretty much had no choice but to go today. Their strategy's always been to do as little as possible, the so-called narrow path, and that, of course, leaves them exposed to upside surprises on the economy and inflation, and that's exactly what we've got over the last few months. So I think it was pretty clear that they were going to go, and, of course, we've had some interventions from various places which have meant that if they didn't go today, that they just looked like they weren't independent. They were in the government's pocket. So they did what they had to do, and I'm pretty happy that they've done that, because really what we don't want to get ourselves into a situation is where they just get so far behind the game they end up having to jack up rates to like 5.5%, 6% next year, and that we know will put us into recession. So it's good that they're responding, but I think they could still be a little bit more assertive, a little bit more aggressive.
Warren, last time we had you on the show, I think it was for the July RBA decision to hold, and you came out with some pretty strong words that they got that one wrong and that they should have hiked that month. Are you feeling somewhat vindicated now that, inflation is a bit higher than that they had expected, and perhaps if they had hiked in July, maybe you wouldn't have this issue right now? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that might have been August. I was happy with July. They'd done May and June, and then the July we got the CPI at the end of the month. In August, they chose not to go when I think they should have. And look, I think the data we've had recently, the inflation numbers do vindicate what I've been saying, and that is, I was completely on the same page as them through last year. That is to pivot early to 25s away from 50s, give Australians a chance to adjust, given all the variable rate mortgages and all that sort of stuff. But it was pretty clear when we started the year that they needed to get on with it, and they didn't. In February, they should have gone 50. And yes, they probably should have had the cash rate at this level or higher in August. So I do feel that the way things have played out have justified that. The fact that the housing markets basically reversed all of the declines of last year is completely unhelpful. And, that's a classic misallocation of resources, all these poor people buying houses at extraordinarily expensive levels. And if rates do end up going up another percentage point, I can tell you house prices won't keep going up. So, yeah, it is a case that I don't agree with their strategy this year, that it's, I think, heavily influenced by their failures in the past. That is that 2024 forward guidance, the political environment, the fact that the new government didn't want anything to do with these rate hikes, and all these people are sort of attacking them as the problem, when the real problem that's hurting Australians is inflation and the cost of living. The higher rates are hurting a subset of Australians who have got a lot of mortgage debt or have got low incomes and little flexibility. But that's a harsh reality that you can't save those people for the sake of the whole country. So anyway, look, they got on with it today, and unfortunately, until I see this economy really turn, I don't think we're done yet.
For sure. And you mentioned inflation just there, about how it affects everyone, not just, mortgage rates going up. But does the RBA risk pushing the boat out further to 2026 rather, instead of 2025 for their inflation target? Even though they acted today, is that still a risk?
I'm less concerned that they're going to do that than end up having to jack up rates quickly at some stage next year. Their credibility is on the line. As I said today, it was very much on the line. And then if they were to push it out further, it would be gone. And they've said they're not going to do that. The risk with the way they sort of softly approach and just little steps here and there is that they just constantly, being mugged by reality. Every time a quarterly inflation number comes out, they get surprised, they have to go. And then if we really have got this wrong, if even my views got upside risk to it, then having to raise rates 4 or 5 times would do a lot of damage. So, yeah, I think it's less of a risk that they push the inflation returning to target sort of view out, that they just lose their patience and jack up rates a lot. And that'll be the ultimate true test of their independence, because that will have extraordinarily potent in political implications.
Warren, I had to dig through the records, just going back to 1990 and seeing, when all the last, the rate hikes were. And I noticed that November was the most common time to hike rates. There were more rate hikes in November than any other month. Is there a particular reason why we tend to see more rate hikes in November compared to other months?
Yeah, well, look, I've been sort of doing this for over 25 years, so I've been sort of there watching it live. And the answer is, at any point in time, is like we're sitting here today, the answer is no. I mean, we get a quarterly inflation figure, so February, May, August and November are the big months. But you're right, the common months for going seem to be February and November and December. Now, the one rationale you could have for November and December is that something like 30% of all consumer spending happens between now and the end of the year, and you're going to get some bang for your buck and maybe stop something happening. Or if you are cutting rates and you're trying to give the economy a kick, you give it a kick now into Christmas and get people trying to spend. So that could be the rationale for the end of the year. And the reason February has been very popular is because January is the only month they have off. So with a 2-month gap between meetings, you got just a higher probability that you have to move, whether it's a hike or a cut. So I think the November one is literally just that this is a really economically important time. And if you want to slow the economy down, it's important to do it now. Or if you want to give the economy a boost, it's important to do it now.
For sure. And just one last one. We've seen some personnel changes at the RBA recently. Some new board members come through. Lucy Ellis left to go to Westpac. Are there any teething issues that you foresee with these changes with Bullock and her first sort of cash rate rise? Do you reckon there's any sort of, not infighting, but any sort of gritted teeth?
Look, it's hard to say. I think the Michelle Bullock is a long-standing player there that hasn't been one of those dominant characters that was sort of ordained to be a future governor, like a Guy Debelle or a Phil Lowe or a Glenn Stevens before there. So I think she's generally well-liked. I think the big issue is going to be they've got a deputy governor's role to be appointed. It's imminent any day. That'll come from the outside. And then they've got to appoint their chief economist to replace Lucy Ellis, where they got Marianne Kohler, who's currently acting in the role, or do they bring someone in from the outside? And there's definitely an appetite to sort of change things. I mean, their culture, you go back 10, 15 years, which of course is still lingering, is one of excellence, of elitism, almost military-like thinking, in terms of the disciplines around thinking about the economy, data. And that, of course, is a tough culture for a modern workplace. So they're trying to soften all that up, but maintain their excellence. And the other thing is they're trying to get some more perspectives in there. So look, it'll always be difficult when there's change, but I'm not sure that that's the main issue. I think the main issue they've got is getting on top of this inflation for the Australian community. I mean, all this other stuff's secondary for me. I'd just like to reiterate, because I think that the narrative in this country has never been so misguided in my 25 years as it has been over the last year, is that it is inflation which is hurting, and interest rates going up are maybe part of the problem, but they are the only solution. You don't even start thinking about all your other policy levers like cutting back infrastructure spending and raising taxes or whatever else gets thrown out there until your interest rate's at least somewhere near what it needs to be given the macro fundamentals. And the reality is, even after today, 4.35% cash rate, our core inflation rate's over 5%. We've still got a negative real interest rate. Don't even talk to me about doing anything else until that real interest rate is at least at 1%, if not at 2%. So this is the RBA's problem. They have not been able or willing to be aggressive and deal with this inflation. And I think they've just, that is the biggest issue. They got to face that. And the whole senior team, the board, everyone will absolutely live to rue this for the rest of their lives if they completely stuff it up, because what that means is what we had in the late 1980s, and that is you chase it and then you have to break the economy, and that does real damage. And I don't think we're going to go down that route, but that's why I think that's what they got to focus on now. And again, she should have gone 40 today, not 25. She should have given the housing market and the broader community and the government the big up yours. And I'm serious about fighting inflation, but they're not. Anyway.
And bringing the cash rate up to a nice even 4.5.
Well, I'd like that, and my spreadsheets would like that, and my models of currency would like that. But
all those OCD types, yeah.
Exactly right. And OCD types make the world work. Anyone seen the Beckham documentary? Come on.
I did, yeah. That man likes to clean his kitchen bench. Well, strong, unadulterated words, as always, from Warren Hogan there. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us on Savings Tip Jar.
Fantastic. Thanks for having us on, guys. See you soon.
Thanks, Warren.
All right, that was Judo Bank's Chief Economic Advisor, Warren Hogan, with some strong views, as always, there. Now, for more expert views, I'm pleased to say we're joined by Professor of Economics at the University of Queensland, John Quiggin. G'day, John. Thanks for joining us on the Savings Tip Jar.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for sharing your day and your time with us on this busy day, John. So, super broad question. What did you make of the RBA's latest decision to hike the cash rate to 4.35%?
In my view, it's more about the institutional and political interests of the Reserve Bank than it is about the management of the economy. They are under a lot of pressure regarding their so-called credibility. The Financial Review, for example, saying they have to do this. And so it's in the interest of the bank to demonstrate toughness by raising interest rates. It's far from clear that this was the right decision as far as the economy is concerned.
Interesting view there. I mean, we did see Michelle coming out with some strong words in a speech. I think it was a week or two ago, basically saying the RBA has very low tolerance for ongoing inflation. So, what were your thoughts, on that speech and the decision in light of what she had said a week or two before?
Well, the RBA, of course, has a multi-part mandate that includes full employment as well as inflation. What we're seeing, I think, is the bank definitely prioritising inflation above maintaining full employment, but precisely because, as it says, they're the ones who cop the flat. If there's high inflation, really they can get away with increasing unemployment. And I think that's what they're doing.
What did you make of Jim Chalmers' recent comments around, that the latest inflation figures weren't material enough to warrant a rate increase? Is this kind of a bit unusual for a treasurer to step into a non-political organisation?
Well, I don't think the Reserve Bank is non-political. I think it's a political actor with its own agenda and ideology. It has been the practice more recently for treasurers not to say much. Of course, that's by no means always the case. And obviously the government is itself facing difficulty. It's accepted the recommendation to remove its capacity to override the bank's decisions. And I suppose it's perhaps seeing this as providing it with the excuse to jump in and second guess it. I agree with Chalmers. I am a little surprised that he would say this.
And just, John, taking a little look into your crystal ball there, how do you see the RBA's moves in December and February next year? Do you think this rate hike means there's less chance of a hike next month or more chance of a hike? What are your thoughts there?
I think it's highly unlikely we'll see another increase in interest rates unless we see big news in inflation. As I say, this was essentially a symbolic move to the bank to say we let inflation get away a little while ago. We're not going to do it again, and we're going to show we're tough, and we're going to keep essentially the financial sector on side. So I think having done that, again, judging this politically, it will make no sense for them to increase rates again. All the evidence is that inflation is falling. The case for driving it down rapidly isn't strong, especially when the increases earlier this year really haven't had time to have their full effect.
For sure. And we'll move now to the board itself. So what are your thoughts on the board? Have they got the balance right between, business types, industry types and academics?
I guess my view is it's neither fish nor fowl. That is, it doesn't have much academic at the kind of capacity that might challenge the governor. On the other hand, when you look at who's represented there, it's very much a very narrow sector of the economy. I mean, it used to be that the board had a lot of people who were supposedly representative of community groups, trade unions, and so forth. Now we have a board which is well designed. If their bank's primary business was printing banknotes, for example, people who know how to run an organisation, but as a sounding board for monetary policy, it makes no sense at all. So I do welcome the decision with the review to move to a separate monetary policy board. I don't think the current board has any purpose whatsoever.
And John, just having a look at, some of the current underlying drivers of inflation in Australia at the moment, we saw in the last quarterly figures that came out, obviously petrol prices were a big driver, but we're also seeing, rent is also driving that, higher rents on property. Hiking the cash rate, is that really doing much to slow down those key underlying drivers of inflation? Or, I guess in the case with rents, perhaps it's actually worsening the problem because you do see investors, landlords will tend to pass on the rate increases to their tenants. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, of course, petrol prices are driven by what's happening on world markets, by the exchange rate and so forth. So they shouldn't be taken into account. In theory, rents are what the market will bear, but obviously, in fact, given Australia's peculiar structure where most landlords are small households with one or two properties, lots of those households don't make that decision. They decide to put up the rent when their own bills become higher. So not only, of course, the mortgage on their properties, but even their own home mortgage says, look, I'm doing it tough here. I have to pass on this increase. So I expect that both rents and, of course, mortgage interest, which is not part of the CPI, but is part of the cost of living, both of those things are going to go up. So I don't think to the extent that the average person sees this as, in terms of the cost of living, it's going to be helpful. If you look at the bank's own statements, they're talking about services inflation. So what they're really still focused here on the idea of wages as a driver of inflation. We're seeing a little bit of catch up in wages, which would suggest a slower, less aggressive policy, let wages catch up, let inflation decline gradually. Instead, the bank is seeing this as a reason to stomp on things even harder.
What do you make of, like you might have seen this, I think it was late last week, that the IMF came out saying Australia needs to rein in infrastructure spending to kind of rein in inflation. What do you make of that? And because it's pretty nice to have a new highway, right?
Well, I don't know if inflation is the right frame precisely because most of these infrastructure projects are over a long period. But there's no doubt that we have a big program there that's really, I think, too big. Unfortunately, we've seen a couple of big vanity projects like the Hobart AFL Stadium, AUKUS. These things are being pitched as job creation at a time when really our problem is we don't have enough workers to fill the jobs. And so those kinds of projects are taking away from housing in particular, which is I don't want to say building more housing units is the only part of the solution, but pretty clearly we have to do that if we're going to do anything. So in some sense, we have to do this stuff. Inflation is probably the wrong way to think about it. But we do have to rein in spending, I think, in that construction sector.
And John, we just get the sense that, with every rate hike, obviously a lot of people who are loaded up to their eyeballs in debt with their mortgages, they seem to really blame the current sitting government, even though, they are separate from the RBA and the RBA is supposed to be totally independent. So how do you see this playing out politically for the Albanese government?
A good question. I mean, I've never been a great political predictor, so it's hard to say. I mean, I think it certainly can't help them. And I suppose what I'd say is rather than going along with the cost of living framing of things, I would say what we need to look at is the fact that wages aren't keeping pace with prices. And, of course, the Albanese government's been doing a bit of stuff, but it's still the fact that real wages are falling. If I were them, I guess I would have taken it head on and said, and taken on the view being expressed most notably by parts of business that it's really wages to blame. I would have been pushing for more rapid wage increases and a slower decline in inflation. Whether that would work politically, I have no idea, but that's what the economics suggest we should be doing.
For sure. John Quiggin, thank you. That's all we have time for on the Savings Tip Jar podcast. Thanks again for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, John.